Hey everyone, what's up, and welcome to the chapter about the calling station player archetype. Now, as I do in other chapters, I want you guys to think a bit, if you know that a player is a calling station, what kind of exploitative adjustments would you make against him? And would it be possible for you to make those in a way that doesn't give away that you're making them? And here, I think you kind of run into, if you take a few minutes to think about it, and then press play, I'll keep talking because you guys can pause. You run into kind of a difficult issue because, especially if it's heads up, 6 max, that there are more players and everything, but against a calling station, you'd like to not bluff. And if you don't bluff, you can't hide the hand that doesn't bluff, right? Maybe if he bets, you can fold, but your betting frequency goes down. You need to make river give ups. It's tough, right? You're giving away information. There's no way not to, like, if you don't bluff your bust to draw, he's going to see. If you do bluff your bust to draw, which adjustment are you making? It's kind of a difficult conundrum. And, of course, we'll address it. But before doing that, I want to talk a bit about the concept of calling station and to give the concept a bit more depth. Because how do you find out someone is a calling station? There are generally a few different ways. So one way you might find out someone is a calling station is, you guys, a simple example. This is a King 10-6 two-tone board. Button versus big blind, and we get to almost range bet because there are 2 cards that hit our offsuit range on the board, 2 broadways. So if we bet small, our opponent is supposed to react like this. And you guys can see every pocket pair calls, every board pair calls, every gut shot calls, every flush draw calls. Some like ace highs with a backdoor call. But there are hands that fold, right? Now, if you're familiar with how this works, and you see that you bet 1/3 pot, and your opponent showed up with ace deuce of clubs on the river, or he showed up with queen deuce of spades on the river, or he showed up with 8-4 of spades on the river, whatever. I'm showing you guys hands that are clear 100% folds. You might deduce, oh, this guy is a calling station. But really all that we know about this guy is that he floats the small c-bet too much, or maybe he floats c-bets too much. So he is a station against c-bets, but that doesn't necessarily mean he's a station. It means, something about the small bet and his knowledge of the game tree makes him call more than he should, but once big bets start coming through, there's no indication that this guy's not going to make big folds, and he might actually overfold compared to the solver. So it's one type of player you can think of as someone who floats flop too much. The second type of player, so here we bet flop, we get to the turn. The turn's a 3 of clubs, no one checks, and here we overbet 1.5x spot. Again, you guys should learn more about how to overbet if this sizing is not familiar to you, but it's not super important. It's okay to use whatever you're comfortable with. Always better to use something that you understand than the optimal sizing. So against a turn overbet, you can see that your opponent should continue every king. He should mix with 10s, and he should mostly fold 6s, but definitely fold pocket pairs. Now, sometimes you'll overbet the turn, and someone will call you with 8s, and this will show down to the river. Now, is this guy a calling station? Well, on the flop, not necessarily, right? On the turn, for sure. And here I want to throw out, I want to add complexity to the discussion. So you always need to think about, why is the guy calling? Because calling station is a bit simplistic, and as we saw in the chapter about the aggressive player archetype, just because a guy is over aggro doesn't mean he's going to be over aggro when the flop is 3-way with a whale. So we need to not generalize too much. And here, there are lots of draws. So maybe this guy is a station when there are lots of draws. And he plays normal otherwise. So maybe. But generally, people who station one spot are likely to be stationing other spots as well. Because, it's just the way their brain is wired. They don't understand the thresholds correctly. They like bluff catching, or, you wouldn't call eights. Like, it's easy. If I don't know poker, it's a very personality-driven thing to call or fold with a bluff catcher, like eights here. Or something like king deuce as well. Like, some people would fold king deuce against the turnover bet. It's very personality-driven, and I would expect this kind of guy to generally station a lot of spots. But yeah, let's say he calls eights. So we don't know that he necessarily overcalls flop. And we don't know that he necessarily overcalls river. Maybe he even has this kind of mentality of, nothing's over till the river, my hand can still improve. And then on the river he believes here and he actually folds everything. So here we have a guy who stations the turn. And of course the third and maybe most common type you guys might know is when it goes, say river. River is like a jack of hearts and villain checks and you overbet shove and he snap calls you with king eight of diamonds and you'd be like, what a fucking station. Hopefully I can say that word. If not, it's gonna get edited out, but yeah, obviously calling king eight of diamonds, especially snap calling king eight of diamonds here indicates that the guy is a river station. Is he a flop station? Not necessarily. Is he a turn station? Not necessarily, but there is a decent chance, but not necessarily. Is he a river station? For sure. So when I call someone a station, it's always going to be based on observed data points, right? I'm going to observe him playing C showdowns and kind of deduce, is he a flop station? Is he a turn station? Is he a river station? And maybe, I connect a few dots and I'm like, this guy just stations everything, but not necessarily. So what we're going to do is talk about how we can build an exploitative game plan against each of these players, and we'll try to construct these in a way where your opponent will have a difficult time figuring out what you're doing. And yeah, then we'll get into some hand examples. I'm not sure if it will be in this video or the next one, we'll see. Okay, so flop station. There are a few different ways you can exploit a flop station. If I were playing heads up against someone, I'd actually mix the different ways. I'd do it, one hand one way, the other hand the other way to mix things up. When you play full ring or six max, you face people less often. So that's less important, because the way we exploit a flop station is not going to be super obvious anyway. Okay. So level one way to exploit a flop station would be to say, I want to bet more value heavy on the flop. And this would mean shifting to a polarized betting range, increasing our bet size, which is good, and putting, lots of strong hands in the betting range and trying to shift our bluffs into the check-back range, at least the low equity stuff, as much as possible. And then you end up with a strong range that barrels a lot. The check-back range is weak, but this guy doesn't know that your check-back range is weak. And that part of the game tree should play reasonably okay for you. But yeah, flop, you're making extra money and you dodge putting in money band with your band hands. So this would be, I think, the level 1 adjustment. Level 2 adjustment, or kind of a more advanced adjustment, would be to say something like this. If you're calling all these weak hands on a flop, like 8-4 of spades, queen deuce of spades, ace deuce of diamonds, and you get the turn, and now I overbet, naturally all those hands are going to fold the turn, right? All the extra hands that called flop are now going to fold turn. Which means that unless you're also a turn station, you will be overfolding turn. So let's say I bet flop, you call with 10 combos extra. I now bet turn, you fold with those extra 10 combos. So what does this mean for my hands, well, versus a flop station. So if my opponent calls 10 extra combos on the flop and folds them on the turn, how does my heir perform? Well, my one and done heir loses money, and my two-barreling heir wins money. Why does my two-barreling heir win money? If you think about it, it's getting these 10 combos. Let's say it would be break-even before. Now it has these 10 extra combos that are putting in a flop bet and then folding. So basically giving you the flop bet for free. So really great for your two-barreling range. Really, really great. So you could make the adjustment of two-barreling more heir. And the nice thing about this is that there's also a river, right? So when I bet flop and check back turn, my opponent gets to the river with the weak hands in his range. And often these hands will bluff. And them bluffing successfully depends on me having heir that bet flop check back turn. If I go bet with a ton of my heir, and whenever I check back the turn, I'm going to have hands that bluff catch. And if those would have been close to 0 EV before, now they get these 10 extra bluffing combos from our opponent who put in a flop bet bad and now bluff into them. So they get the plus EV bluffing small. So yeah, we could bluff flop less, but we could also just two-barrel our bluffs. So in a way, you can beat the station by being more aggressive, right? We already talked about how just because someone is aggressive doesn't mean calling is correct. It really depends on the way in which he's aggressive. And if I know someone's floating too much and I don't have other big assumptions against him, just two-barreling bluffs should destroy him. I would be a bit hesitant to do this, but of course, if the read is the guy station's turn but not river, then go for it. But personally, I would shy away from this. I'd go more like check back a bit more weak stuff on the flop, barrel thinner on the turn, even just barrel thinner on the turn, to be honest, should kind of do its thing. And barrel less bluffs on the turn. You know, very, very simply, bluffing turn underperforms. So you can hide information by taking hands that bluff turn and mixing them either into a flop check back range or a turn check back range. And as long as you're mixing them into both, I think the information is hidden well enough because it's a turn adjustment, not a flop adjustment. So it's not a spot you get into every second hand. Third player type, the river station. Now, a river station is also a bit tough, because you saw the guy make a super wide bluff catch on the river. Maybe he was wide on flop and turn and his frequencies are okay. Maybe. We're not going to know. But for now, we're going to assume he's a big river station. Now, for whatever reason, maybe he thinks you bluff too much. Maybe it's the situation. Maybe he's tilted because he had a fight with his girlfriend. Whatever. Station's rivers. So we want to stop bluffing rivers against this guy. We want to not make it super obvious. Hopefully at this point you guys can understand that the way to do this is to tuck away your bluffs in as many spots as possible. We're kind of trying to hide them. You don't want to go normal, and then you reach the river with your busted draw and you're like, okay, this guy's a station, let's give up. Because he'll see that and that's not good for you. So you want to think about this in advance. And I would say, the river is the street on which I don't want to give up bluffs. I don't want the river station to see me give up bluffs on the river. Because that is something that will stick in his head and I'll be less confident about my read, and it's a good read to have. So I would try to mix in my give-ups with bluffs on the flop and on the turn as much as possible. Only fire turn with very high equity draws that would follow through a lot. And then follow through river even when you miss. Okay, so for example, let's say you have a flush draw. Busted flush draws are supposed to give up. So you can go bet, give up. Busted flush draw. That doesn't give away information. But this kind of board, if I'm on the turn and I have 7-8 suited, which should always bet turn, and I bet and we get some river and I give up, that might wave a flag to my opponent. So I wouldn't do this with 7-8. But maybe Queen Jack or 4-5 that have higher chance to improve on the river, I would do this and I would fire river because I want the guy to still catch me bluffing, right? If this is a long-term relationship between me and him, I want him to catch me bluffing. I want him to have the satisfaction of catching me bluffing. I want him to not feel like he needs to adjust, while in truth under bluffing him. So the way to do that is to reduce bluffs on the flop and on the turn. So starting on the flop, we can check back more weak stuff. On the turn, we'll focus more on barreling hands that are easy give-ups on the river, whether it's, ace, queen, ace, jack, the flush draws, or the really high equity stuff. So open-enders, but no kind of gut shots or other types of bluffs that he would expect us to fire. And I just bite the pill and bluff off the open-enders. You don't have to bet every open-ender on the turn, but you want the guy to catch you bluffing on the river still, at least sometimes. So yeah, I think those would be the 3 adjustments. Of course, how we recognize the player types, we just take notes of showdowns all the time, and here we have to take... Usually I note showdowns against myself. If it's a very, very bad player, I will note everything and assume that he's not adjusting. But very often a player will play differently against different opponents. So I'm concerned, how does this guy play against me specifically? Just because he made a loose call against someone else does not mean he's going to make that loose call against me. I'm taking notes about the showdowns I get to see against him. Of course, I need to know where the thresholds are. I need to have the reference point of GTO in order to understand, is this guy calling too much or not? And in a way, I need to know his pre-flop range. Like if he's 100 VPIP pre-flop, he can call too much on the flop and still overfold, and make loose calls on the river and still overfold. But I'm not talking about 100 VPIP guys, right? We're talking about stronger player who's a station. So we give up some bluffs on the flop. Hopefully, this is one of the nice things about a polarized betting strategy, is that it lets you hide information really well. We try to give up bluffs that would have to fire river on the turn specifically. Of course, we can go river a bit thinner. We can go a bit bigger. If you want to be creative, you could size stuff differently. So you could maybe keep firing turn, but fire bluffs on the turn smaller. But this is treading into dangerous territory of potentially giving off bet sizing tells yourself. So you have to be a bit careful, and only do that if you're confident your opponent's not going to pay attention. Okay, so I think that kind of summarizes how I would intuitively suggest we adjust to a calling station. And yeah, next we will get into some hand examples in the following chapter. See you guys there.